So my 9700 and 9600X video just went live, and one of the main comments was, actually, you should have enabled PBO. So that's what we're gonna do today. And see what kind of curve optimization we can get, and whether or not overclocking one of these CPUs is even gonna yield any real results. It actually probably will. For those looking for a high-end custom gaming experience, look no further than Falcon Northwest. Falcon Northwest has been building PCs made for gamers for over 30 years with a focus on a true high-end gaming experience. Custom cases available only through Falcon Northwest feature state-of-the-art testing and design to ensure that every component is performing at their best through thermal imaging and rigorous lab testing designed and overseen by the Falcon Northwest founder himself. With a complete lineup of systems ranging from small to large, every Falcon Northwest system includes a 3-year warranty policy and a year of 2-way overnight shipping coverage, providing the ultimate peace of mind. To see all that Falcon Northwest has to offer, follow the sponsored link in the description below. This is our AMD AM5 test bench. It consists of an X670E Tai Chi motherboard from ASRock. It's got 32 gigabytes of 6000 megahertz Crucial Pro, which we are running at 5200 megahertz Expo 2 profile for our tests. It's got a 360 EK AIO in there. I just haven't replaced it yet with something different. Probably should have done that, I guess, when we had all the CPUs coming in and out of there. Anyway, and this is a Founders Edition NVIDIA RTX 4090, which we use for our bottleneck tests. So, and then the drive is I think it's a Crucial NVMe drive. Doesn't really matter because we're doing CPU evaluations. Anyway, let's talk about PBO real quick. That stands for Precision Boost Overdrive. It's AMD's built-in overclocking utility that you can use on their CPU, because pretty much every CPU of theirs is unlocked to a degree. It's like the Black Edition stuff with FX. They're all unlocked. Precision Boost Overdrive works very similar to how like a GPU boost does, where as long as there's temperature headroom and there is a power limit headroom and we've got voltage headroom, it will push the clocks up as high as it possibly can to get you the best performance. Now, you have to enable that feature. The reason why we don't enable that feature in our benchmarks is we test out-of-the-box experience. The same way on Intel CPUs, we run them at the Intel default extreme profile. The default profile, like what actually is listed as defaults on Intel, it's not really defaults at all, to be honest. It's like it's so far below what they advertise, it's like criminal at that point.
They call it baseline.
Yes, baseline, which means this is what it will turn it on, basically. Anyway, the extreme profile is really the normal profile, which is like the 253 watts for like the i9 stuff, or like 180 watts for like the i7 stuff. So we also made sure that none of the auto overclocking, auto features that are built into motherboards, which have been destroying Intel CPUs, part of Intel's whole ecosystem problem, wasn't present. But we don't enable PBO because it's not a guaranteed performance uplift. Not all AMD CPUs are gonna uplift the same. Not all of them are gonna get the same types of scores. So we test out of the box. Then we start playing around with our particular ASIC samples or ASIC qualities to see what kind of performance that we get. So you guys have already seen the charts. What we're gonna do today is I'm gonna enable PBO. We're gonna see where it goes to in terms of frequency. Then we're gonna do the auto curve optimizer. Now, curve optimizer, it's a more granular type of PBO where Precision Boost Overdrive will lift all of the limits, all these guys up here, all our power limits and stuff. But what it will do is it will also do its own stability test and stress testing on a per core basis if you do per core, or all core, which is what I'll be optimizing for. And it will test each core individually to see where its max offset is for frequency boost. And then each core can actually get a different boost than each other. That's actually the best way to do it, but I do all core, one, because it's faster. It takes a while. Like on this CPU, the 9700X, it's gonna take like an hour to do an all core. It would take even longer to do per core, because then it has to go through and test all those cores individually, where per core will see how they all do with the same workload evenly. So it kind of tunes for the worst core, technically, and then they all get limited to where the worst core is. So per core, Curve Optimizer would be the best result, but it takes hours to complete. And if you have a big CPU like a Threadripper, you will be there for probably a day or more getting Curve Optimizer. Anyway, moving on, we're in all default settings right here. Let me double check my memory is where it was on our previous runs. Yep, 5200 right there. It will run 6000 if we do a 1-to-1 ratio for the F-clock or the fabric, but this is I just chose Expo 2 5200. It'll run, it'll guarantee it's not gonna crash, mostly. We might catch a blue screen or two on here as we go. But anyways, you can see right here our temperature limit's 85, which is interesting because that's actually a 10-degree drop over previous generations. 7000 series was up to 95C. So this is very similar to how the X3D stuff was. So the X3D stuff had an 85 or 89C limit depending on the CPU. So that's kind of interesting. But you can see we only have 88 watts available to us. Although it's a 65 watt part, it will allow itself to push as high as 88 watts for more bursty workloads that might suddenly spike. But what I'm looking for right here is, at least in Cinebench, in this instruction, what is our max clock gonna do for all core? So you can see we're getting 4.65 gigahertz all core. It's actually a little bit higher than what some of the other guys were seeing. I think some of the other guys were seeing like 4.4, 4.45, maybe 4.5. Ours is doing pretty good actually at 4.65. That's still disappointing for an all-core boost clock, considering like we're used to seeing over 5 gigahertz now boost clocks when it comes to Intel. So Intel's kind of indoctrinated us to this high boost clock stuff, but we also know how they were doing it now. They were basically self-destructing. So we'll see how it goes after the microcode update. And then might as well let the test finish here. But it stayed steady at 56C, and it was at 4.65 the entire time for a score of 20,524. It's gonna be up or down a few percent run to run because of things happening. So anyway, that's where we wanted to see where we went. Oh, let's look at our power once again. Let me just start the test one more time. So we see where our power and amps peak out at. So we are hitting the 88 watts right there. Well, that's total PPT, but our CPU power is at 71 watts technically. A little bit above the 65 watt that they show, but again, this is software monitoring, right? So this is what's being reported. And we're at 89% of our 75 amp TDC. But again, the temperatures, 56 to 57C. It's got a 360 AIO on there with Kingpin Extreme Thermal Paste, so it's performing pretty damn good when it comes to cooling. It should at that TDP, honestly. Now here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna show you something that's kind of broken, and this is one thing to consider when it comes to using BIOS features that the motherboards implement, which I think a lot of people have finally learned their lesson with. Hopefully, Intel has created change for the industry as a whole, including AMD, because most motherboards, especially X670, X670E motherboards, have built-in PBO profiles. All right, so here I am in the BIOS, memory aside, it's set to 5200 Expo 2 profile. If you're curious, you can see it right there. See a GESA default, 5200 megahertz. I can run the 5600, but we were getting crashing when we did the 5600, so that's why we're running 52. It'll probably run 6000, to be honest, just fine with, if I was to do the F clock at 2000, but as you can see, this RAM doesn't show an Expo profile up to 6000, even though it's 6000 megahertz memory. So it is showing XMP equivalents for Expo, but it won't show us the full 6000, which I think is interesting, but that's fine. Also too, for those wondering, on my system with the 7950 X3D, I did get 6000 running just fine. I didn't realize the F clock was defaulting itself to 1733, so it wasn't a one-to-one multiplier, so it should have been set to 2000. As soon as I did that, it's been rock solid ever since. All my lagging and stuff I was getting in Photoshop all went away. So remember, F clock matters. Anyway, if we go over here to performance preset, they do have built-in profiles that you can use. You can just enable PBO, which will probably give us an uplift no matter what, because remember, we were hitting the 4.46 gigahertz all core. TJ Max of 85. This is where I think there's still some BIOS updates that need to happen regarding the new series of processors. I don't understand why 85C is the new limit when 95C was the previous limit on 7000. And what you'll notice with these limits right here, the reason why 85C exists on here is because of the 7000 series having a 95C. So these were put in for people that were concerned at seeing that high wattage, although that's the way it was intended to actually perform. So you could drop it by 10 degrees at a time. So 85, 75, 65. So I still feel like it should be 95C probably, but I don't know, I guess we'll see. So it also has a built-in curve optimizer. So curve optimizer right here also has a minus, as you can see, millivolt in there, which is almost like an undervolting, if you will. Again, probably for temperature reasons. So I'm just gonna do the curve optimizer minus 40, and it just rebooted on me right now. Got into Windows, and now you can see right here, if you look here, it is spazzing out. There, okay, I think we're finally getting ready to get an image here. This could be a stability thing too with that minus 40 millivolt. So I could also try it at minus 20. I think I proved the point why you shouldn't do this. Are we gonna get into Windows? I just wanna run it once. Okay. So we're gonna let Ryzen Master do it. So I highly recommend, don't even enable PBO here, let Ryzen Master do it. Leave your BIOS at auto. We'll do it live. If I'm gonna do overclocking or whatever, I'll just go to profile 1 and save one there. So all I'm gonna do here is Precision Boost Overdrive, not even auto overclocking. I don't want to do auto overclocking. I want Curve Optimizer to do all that sort of stuff for me. Because as we curve optimize, we're also going to optimize voltage for temperatures as well. Because if temperature limit is our headroom, is our limit, we'll run out of that. If we can get the voltage down, stability up, frequency up, we can get more frequency before we hit that temperature limit. We can lift the max temperature. Dare I? I'll go 90. I think 90C will be fine. What could go wrong? So when you reboot, it should automatically launch Ryzen Master again. Yes, okay. Should, normally. Also too, if you do a setting in there that's unstable and it detects a crash when you restart, it won't apply the settings. That's why Ryzen Master is preferred over BIOS, because if you apply it in the BIOS, it's just gonna keep trying to apply it and it could keep crashing. So let Ryzen Master do it. Hey, check it out, 90C. There it goes right there. Okay, and all our other limits are where we want them to be. 360 AIO, do your freaking job. 5.23, 5.24 all-core at 87C, 86C, 140 watts. So double the power draw suddenly. But let's see what happens to our score. Remember last time we were at 20,537, I think, somewhere around there. From 4.6 to 5.3 all-core. This is now like Intel territory, by the way, on all-core, which is kind of nice. The only thing that's lacking is core count to really keep up. But you see the max it could go is 5.5 according to that. And our score went up to a 23,325. So nearly 3,000 point increase by literally clicking a button. And then I upped it to 90. So as you can see, we would have hit throttle a little bit on temperature prior to hitting the 5.4 or 5, what was it, 5.34? So it probably would have been like or was it 5.24? It probably would have hit like 5.2, somewhere around there. Okay, what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna stop,
collaborate and listen.
I'm gonna run through all the tests again with these settings to compare how they were with our launch results. And then I'm going to show you guys Precision Boost and Curve Optimizer, show you what it does, like how it does it. Run the test again with Curve Optimizer to see if there's any improvement or benefit to waiting all that time to curve optimize to see what happens. And then we'll put all those scores against each other to see how like this basically one button overclocking does for AMD. This is nothing new. This has been around since Ryzen has existed, only I think it's getting better. We're actually seeing things happen now. All right, so I'm in the middle of my testing. I want to point something out that just happened that's really weird. We talk about these AMD weird problems all the time. The AMD fanboys are always like, there's no weird, you're just dumb when it comes to AMD. But no, thank God Steve had his problems. Otherwise you guys would never believe me that the platform is not fucking perfect. Anyway, moving on, I'm getting my results and stuff through the PBO test, and I had a crash when launching TimeSpy. Phil noticed the crash because the fans, which were running full speed, slowed down. He's like, what happened? I'm like, it crashed. It did the thing like I saw earlier where it wasn't a blue screen, it was just a restart. So the random restarts with AMD has been a thing for years, and no one can figure out why the random restarts just happen. Anyway, on booting back up, I noticed now my limit is 95C. You guys saw me set this to 90, and I wanted to sanity check myself and say, did I screw up? If I go back to profile 1, it's still set to 90. So on the restart, it still applied PBO, but now with a 95C limit, which is what I was saying I thought was weird because 7000 series had a 95C limit. I don't know if this is a 4 nanometer thing. That's just some new limit in terms of temps not going as high. But now if I hit profile 1 and apply, now my 90C is back. So I don't have any clue as to why it shows 95C or showed 95C, because it has never showed 95C with a 9000 series processor in there until this moment. And then I decided to check one more thing, and the RAM reset itself to 5600 megahertz. So it's that times 2, right? Double data rate. So yeah, I mean, check it out here, 5600. So on that restart, it put the RAM back to 5600, which is like, it won't save what I put when it does that stupid restart. It's incredibly irritating. Okay, so after several restarts and crashes and freezes, every time we just let it resume, it finally came back with a minus 33 offset. So the minus 40 obviously was too much of an undervolt. Minus 33, not much difference though. We're talking 7 millivolts here. I guess that could be the difference. All right, so Curve Optimizer is done. Interestingly enough, it drops it's at 95 now. It was at 85 a second ago. Curve Optimizer, all cores, Precision Boost Overdrive. It did a minus 33 offset. I don't think it's gonna be very, and by the way, there was a lot of crashes during it doing its optimizing. Normally it shouldn't crash. Restarts should happen. But crashes, like hard locks, mouse won't move and all that is a problem. Anyway, they raised the limit back up to 95C, which is going to be too high, I think. Okay, Ryzen Master doesn't, well, there we go. Can't make this up, I'm sorry. I know fanboys out there don't want to admit this, but there's problems with some of this software. Anyway, will it run though? On the CO all-core -33, run multi-core, move my mouse. No, and it's frozen. So we're gonna throw the curve optimizer out entirely. Just gonna go ahead and now kind of do Cinebench R23 10-minute runs, just kind of with PBO on, PBO off, take a look at the frequencies over time, look at the voltages over time, and look at the temperatures over time to see what kind of uplift we're seeing in power draw and all that sort of stuff just by enabling PBO. As you guys already saw, it doubles the wattage of the CPU, which is pretty significant. But if we get a good performance uplift, I think a lot of people would be willing to say, I don't care what the power is. In fact, just read the comments of the videos. A lot of people are like, efficiency's cool, but at the end of the day, I want the performance. I don't give a flying F about the efficiency. Most people kind of feel that way, to be honest. And so I guess we'll get it up and running and do that chart now. All right, so it is actually a couple days later. We ended up doing that microcode video in between when we started this one and went on to this one. So that's why you're gonna notice some 14900K, 0x129 and blah, blah, blah on the chart. So disregard that, you've probably already seen it. But moving on, a lot of you keen, eagle-eyed viewers out there, we know there's plenty of you, notice the PBO numbers on those charts. So forgive me if you've already seen this, but we need to finish this video here. So PBO, it's interesting. I showed you guys already how we tried to do a couple of different things. Like I enabled, so first of all, the curve optimizer just did not work well with this generation. I don't know why. I don't know if it's something to do with the fact that the 9000 series right now just seems to be incredibly unstable on our motherboard with the BIOS provided by AMD. Even reinstalled the BIOS to see if whether or not that would fix some of the stability problems. It does all point to being memory related, and I don't get why. For instance, memory management is the most recent like blue screen code we continue to get with this. And we've tried different RAM, we tried different RAM speed. It just continues to happen, but it doesn't really happen on our 7000 series CPUs. And my 7950X3D, which I'm using as my gaming / work system here at work that I did a few weeks back, has been rock solid without a single restart, a single blue screen, and no issues whatsoever on 6000 megahertz memory at a 2000 megahertz F clock. So we'll have to play around with that more. And I've been in communication with AMD regarding some of the stability problems. Unfortunately, right now, they're kind of like quiet on getting me any information back. So we're just kind of left to our own devices to figure that one out. Moving on, we only did the 9700X right here, but you can see we also had the 90C limit on there. And the weird thing that's incredibly inconsistent is that when it crashes and comes back online, as I've already showed, it'll lift the 90C to 95C. Which is super odd, and I don't understand why it's doing that, but whatever. 90C was where the profile I set left it. Curve optimizer with PBO on was actually giving us less result than just enabling PBO. So I did away with the curve optimizer altogether. As I actually showed was that -33 it came up with was not stable at all. So my recommendation is still to just enable PBO and leave it. Let PBO do the work, don't let curve optimizer do anything. I think these are such low voltage, low wattage parts as it is. Reducing any millivolts already increases instability because of the fact that they're such low wattage to begin with. So here we are with Blender CPU test classroom. You can see we actually went up from a 63.98 samples, higher is better, to 71.83. So if we move to junk shop, again, a pretty good jump from 88.2 to 98.84. Again, not catching the anywhere near the 14700K, which this is much more similarly priced to. Actually more expensive than the 14700K when it comes to CPU tasks. But Blender test for Monster, as you can see, we jumped up from 125.42 to a 139.84. Moving on to Cinebench, which is our one core, one thread test. This is where it doesn't really improve. If anything, we lost 10 points. Went from a 2197 to a 2187, but that's because PBO doesn't really push single core. The single core boost is already allowed to go pretty high. It really does do a multi-core uplift when it comes to the multi-core total frequency jump. And I'll show that in the frequency over time chart when we get there. But up or down 10 points could be margin of error. I mean, we do have Things like updates disabled. We don't have any background tasks going. We try and keep the OS as clean and simple as possible so that no program doing something in the background, searching for updates or whatever, could potentially impact our results. This is just an up and down margin of error between run to run. But as you can see on single core thread though, or single core, it's holding its own pretty well against the 14th gen and 13th gen, obviously, respectively. The 9600X down there at 2159 looking real good, and that shows the IPC improvement versus Intel and versus 7000 series. Unfortunately, that IPC, it still has a clock disadvantage versus Intel, where Intel has a higher clock, even though it has less IPC, it has more cycles, which is getting it the better performance. Cinebench R23 multi-core. You can see right here, we jumped from a 20,352 to a 23,325. So that particular AVX instruction set with that CPU and PBO definitely gave us a pretty big jump. Unfortunately, as you can see, it doesn't get us anywhere near its cheaper priced Intel brethren, which is unfortunate. And this is why so many people were saying the cost to performance right now with 9000 series, at least at these CPU levels, the 9600X and 9700X, is just not there, unfortunately. And the reason for that, and again, we'll talk about this when we get to the frequency over time, is although on a core per core IPC basis, AMD right now is superior. Unfortunately, all of these CPUs have a thread count disadvantage, which is why in multi-threaded tests like this, they fall behind because they simply do not have as many cores. We're talking 16 threads, 8 full fat cores. And when I say full fat, I mean, we're not talking E-core, P-core like Intel has, but full-fledged cores with simultaneous multi-threading for 16 threads versus 20 threads on the 14.6 and 28 threads on the 14.7. And the E-cores we've seen definitely pick up a lot of the slack when it comes to the multi-core workload. So realistically, these CPUs just have a thread count disadvantage, which is why I would have loved to have seen them come up with some more of a hybrid type of 10-core, 20-thread or something like that. Unfortunately, the chiplet design just doesn't allow for it. So even though we're uplifting the frequencies, it's not enough to make up for the thread count difference. The single thread though, as you can see, no uplift at all. 132 to 132, and the reason for that, like I said, is PBO doesn't really do much for the max single core frequency, if anything at all. It's all about the all-core frequency. But the Cinebench R24 multi-thread, as you can see here, once again, a severe multi-thread disadvantage. In fact, these charts are sorted price left to right. And you can see we got a very linear curve going up. Unfortunately, when you get to the price of the 9700X, there's a severe drop in performance because unfortunately, its value proposition in multi-threaded workloads is just simply not there. A lot of you are right now gonna be going, but the efficiency. Wait till you see what happens to the efficiency when we enable PBO. We're definitely gonna show that. Now we look at Geekbench single thread, it goes from a 3303 to a 3314. Again, fairly margin of error. The multi-thread though, once again, we go from a 16,063 to a 16,881. So we got 800 points, over 800 points of uplift there, but not enough to close that gap with the 14700K, which is unfortunately cheaper than the AMD CPU. Moving on to Handbrake, we do drop significantly. We go from a 93-second transcode on our over 3 minute 4K video down to 1080p. It's important to note that we are not using quick sync or any of that stuff when it comes to Intel. This is just raw CPU X.264 encoder. But we drop from 93 to an 85. Unfortunately, the 13.7 and the 14.7 are significantly faster at 68 and 63. So we do see a performance increase for a one-click button, but it's not enough to make up that performance gap that I was really hoping to see that gap close, because the all-core frequencies are pretty gimped in my opinion out of the box at about 4.4 to 4.6 gigahertz all-core. It just wasn't enough to make up for it. Gaming Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we see a moderate uplift from a 49 average FPS to 258 average FPS. Again, medium settings, 1080p, no scaling, no RTX, 4090, just pushing all the frames we can to see how the CPU can handle it. But you can see the 13.7 and the 14.7 that are flanking it, outperforming it by more than 20 FPS and up to 30 FPS in some instances there. So a lot left to be desired. We did see a pretty good jump though in times by extreme. We went from a 65.89 to a 76.34. So it shows that there are instances where we can get a pretty good jump in performance, but unfortunately tests like this are designed to really have the chart emphasize an improvement. So that type of percentage improvement doesn't translate to that type of percentage improvement in games, unfortunately. And then if we look at Cyberpunk, a weird title that just doesn't seem to favor AMD. I think this is something a lot of people have realized already, It is definitely a heavily Intel optimized title as far as we can tell, because you can see the 7600X versus 9600X versus 7700X versus 9700X and 9700X with PBO enabled are all like pretty much the same, which is a weird, almost like an artificial cap that's happening there. And their minimum FPS is also nearly the same across the board. It's very odd. It's almost telling like this is an intentional type of bottleneck or something for AMD CPUs. But when we look at the Intel CPUs, we can see the same sort of thing. The 13600K and the 14900K with the latest microcode is 218 versus 229. So Intel is seeing the same type of like across the board sort of cap, regardless of the tier of the SKU. It's just a higher cap. And then their minimum FPS is also a very similar story, but it's much higher in the 180, 190 range versus the 130 range found on AMD. So Cyberpunk's one of those titles which I feel like heavily favors Intel in this instance. Let's talk about the charts over time, because this is where the real differences show. Let's start with core clocks here. So you'll notice the green chart right here, which is core clock average megahertz across, obviously all the cores. This is a 10-minute Cinebench R23 multi-core run. You can see there's some frequency spikes as the test is loaded, which is normal. We've showed this. As the test gets loaded, it's more of a single core type of a workload to load the test. So we see a frequency spike well over 5,000 megahertz up to almost 5.5 megahertz single core. But then as soon as all cores go under load, it drops down significantly. Our particular run was running about 4.65 gigahertz on average, but you can see that line is very wavy. It's all over the place. Temperatures were pretty solid, so that's why we're not seeing a curve downward or anything, because we're not seeing thermals really come into play when it comes to the frequencies. When we enable PBO, you can see we jump up to 5.3 to 5.4 gigahertz all core, and it's definitely locked. Like, it is a more flat line, because that's as far as the frequency scaler will allow PBO to push it. So it definitely hits that 5.3, 5.4 mark, kind of fluctuates between those 50 megahertz there, between like 5.35, 5.4, and then you can see the individual spikes as it's loading the test. Those jump up to about 5.6 on the single core. Now it shows here on this test that the single core does jump up, but on the other tests, as we showed you, which do a longer test under single core, don't really seem to benefit the single core bump, because it doesn't stay up there. It drops back down to like this 5.5, 5.4 range on single core and stays there. So that's why the single core threads on like Geekbench and R24 and R23 don't really show any sort of an uplift over time. So you can see by just enabling PBO, we get a nearly 1 gigahertz bump in performance. It's something I wish that AMD had sort of allowed out of the box, and maybe not heavily emphasize the efficiency, and maybe push these clocks a little bit more out of the box, and maybe made these like a 95 watt part, 85 watt part, something like that versus 65. But when we look at the watts it takes to do that, this is a scary chart. I've seen some people comment saying any CPU that draws over 150 watts is scary to me. Well, this should be terrifying to you, because if you look at our PPT watts, which is the actual power, package power for the CPU itself, that's memory controller, the whole deal, not just the core, but the whole package of the CPU. You can see it goes from about 88 watts, solid, a straight line, no fluctuation at all, to over 160 watts, averaging about 158 watts. So double the power draw for the small amount of performance uplift that you saw. That's the part that's a little disappointing here, is the fact that PBO was able to push the frequencies, but it pushes the power to double for up to 10% performance gain. That's a bad trade-off. That's where the efficiency goes out the window with these particular CPUs. But what about the temperature it took to do that? Well, if we look at the T-die temperature here, this is a more accurate measurement of AMD's, like you have core package temp, you have package temp, and then you have T-die. T-die is what we're looking at here, because this is the more sensitive number that actually handles a lot of the PBO scaling and stuff. You can see we go from the mid 50s, spiking up to about 57, 58 while we do the single core load, and that's that single core that jumps up, that it's measuring that die, to up to 90C. So it actually pushes it up to 90C, because that's what I set, because if you enable PBO, it's still 85C. I wanted to see where it would, if we push beyond that 85, how high will that actually go? The numbers went red. In Hardware Info 64, the numbers are red, because anything over 85 is considered beyond spec. So it pushed itself to 90C. Makes sense considering the fact that we're talking double the wattage, but you can see right now with the chiplet design, and it's so tightly packed, and the way that the whole substrate is designed, it becomes very focused heat. So we go from 55C to 90, which is nuts, but double the power to do it. Makes sense that we would see that type of temperature climb. And the voltage to do it, the one thing that we were super excited about with this, because of the super efficient frequencies and the power limit, it only took about 1.05 volts to be able to run this CPU at its out-of-the-box specs. With spikes though, leading up to about 1.35 volts. But the spikes in the chart, as you already know, is every time it reloads R23, Cinebench R23, it spikes. But check out the orange line, which is our PBO enabled. What I'd like to see though, is you can see that the green spikes and the orange spikes are the same. Not like the Intel thing where it pushes it way up higher. So AMD does have a pretty hard-coded voltage limit in there that says regardless of PBO on or off, don't exceed this voltage. And it's very obvious when you look at the green line versus the orange line. But look at the baseline when it comes to the average frequencies here to maintain an all-core overclock. We're talking about 1.28 to 1.32 volts is what we were averaging according to Hardware Info. So a significant voltage bump, which as you saw, led to a significant PPT increase, which also led to a significant temperature increase. Taking all of the efficiency benefits of this chip out of the window and giving us about 10% more improvement for double the power. It is a one-button overclock. It does allow itself to be able to give you more performance. And if efficiency is not that big of a deal to you, I saw a lot of comments saying, the efficiency is great, but we wish AMD hadn't leaned so heavily on the efficiency discussion and maybe lean more into raw power. This is what happens when you do that. I feel like AMD could have split the difference here somewhere in the middle. They are very appealing chips to people that are not interested in any of the Intel drama right now and don't want to even consider going down that route with a CPU that you can't trust whether or not it's already degraded, or the one that you're buying doesn't already have potential oxidation or whatever. You have a plethora of drama you can pick from right now to say I have buyer anxiety, and it's all valid. AMD right now, you just have to decide whether or not their price to performance on these chips, whether PBO enabled or not, are worth it to you. And as a buyer, that's 100% your decision. I can tell you, people like me don't give a rat's ass about what you buy. It's your money, it's your decision. All we do is present the data here as it presents itself. The numbers are what they are. So PBO enabled on the 9700X did obviously lead to an increase. A bigger increase than we typically see on the higher core count chips with the 16 core, 32 thread chips, because of the fact that there is PPT and temperature headroom in those. The more dense core count chips tend to not benefit from PBO quite as much because they're already near that headroom out of the box. So there you go, guys. PBO numbers, you guys said, why aren't you showing PBO? Well, because I always do this as a separate video because I want to play around with them some more. Anyway, we've got 2 more 9000 series CPUs that need to be tested, so we got to get on out of here. And I may or may not include PBO at the same time with those videos, we'll see. We've got a lot of regression testing here. Our charts are lacking a lot of data, and I'm trying to fill these charts in with data to make it more relevant for you. It's taking time to catch up with what other people have established. So do yourself a favor. I know you already do. Check out as many reviewers as you can to get their takes on these CPUs, because everyone kind of comes at these tests a little differently. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for supporting us. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Oh, and please give me the data points that you think are important to you. I want to know what information you think is relevant, and I'm trying to get it all in there. And sometimes what I think is relevant, you don't, and vice versa. So sound off in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.